Are you a WordPress freelance developer? Then you need to be on Upwork. Did you know that 7% of jobs posted on Upwork are directly related to WordPress? So to understand what's happening in the WordPress ecosystem, I invited my former business partner and friend, Brian Gardner, to join us on the show. Brian is the principal WordPress advocate at WP Engine and has been building on WordPress since 2006. I know of no better person to have on the show to discuss what is happening in the WordPress ecosystem and, more importantly, how those changes can help you earn more money as a freelance WordPress developer on Upwork. Let's hear what he has to say. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. We really appreciate it.
Sean, it's been a hot minute since we've talked last, but we spent quite a bit of time doing stuff together, especially in the WordPress space. So it's kind of fun to come back full circle for sure.
Exactly. Well, as you're keenly aware, WordPress is extremely popular, especially in the freelancing space. And what's interesting is that your role today is as the WordPress advocate for WP Engine. And while I think many people know what the heck WP Engine is, I'm not sure what a WordPress advocate is. So can you tell us what you actually do for a living?
Well, recently, this past spring, we did a slight shift in my title. I was a developer advocate, but then I sort of made the pitch to change my role exclusively to be called WordPress advocate, because as it sounds, I advocate for WordPress on behalf of WP Engine. As you obviously know, the folks listening or watching may not, but years ago, I've been doing WordPress stuff since 2006, so I'm certainly no youngster here. Co-creator of the Genesis framework, founder of StudioPress and all of that. But right now I'm advocating for modern WordPress is kind of like what we call it. But really what we're talking about is block-based WordPress, kind of where WordPress is going. And so I get paid to spend time following the project and engaging with the community and all of those sort of things. So basically helping designers and developers, freelancers and small agencies and even larger agencies understand how it's working now, because it's very drastic, right? Where WordPress is heading is a pretty good departure from what it has historically been. So aside from people who work at Automatic, there are people in the community who need people to give them the cliff notes.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting given your history in this. And of course, when you co-created the Genesis framework, when Matt basically said we should all be building WordPress sites on themes and child themes. I mean, it was a fundamental shift at the very early days of WordPress. And now it is radically transformed. I mean, that's probably, it's been years since I've actually gotten into the guts of WordPress. But from what I can tell as an outsider, it's a new landscape out there. The number of companies using WordPress is huge. And it's not just your bloggers like where we all started out with. It's big enterprises, right? We had Jason on the show, Jason Cohen, and he was talking about headless, and which is a whole other degree of complexity and benefits and et cetera. So let's kind of back up for a second. I know you just got back from WordCamp Minneapolis, and I saw you post with your Starbucks cup. So by the way, if you ever meet Brian, buy him a cup of Starbucks. He loves Starbucks. So where are you seeing the market today? I mean, it's obviously so different. Where do you see kind of WordPress today and WordPress in the near future?
So it's a fascinating question. Sometimes it's frustrating for me because where WordPress itself actually is further ahead than I would say collectively where the design and development people of WordPress are. Because WordPress has changed over the last 5 years since Matt sort of introduced the Gutenberg editor and WordPress 5.0 and all of that. WordPress looks drastically different from the dashboard, from the usability than it did 5 years ago. And the reason behind all of that are Squarespace and Wix and Framer and Webflow. All of these sort of no-code, drag and drop, make it easy to build a website tools have sort of forced the hand of WordPress to become more of that and not necessarily less of a database driven, and it's extremely powerful. And I'm sure Jason talked about those sort of advantages on the last episode. But the collective base of users and people who are designing and developing with WordPress are slow to adapt building for this new version of WordPress. Understandably so. There's established workflows, there's time to learn, there's a lot of investment involved. And let's face it, WordPress is still evolving. It's sort of being built mid-flight, which means it's hard to build for a system that you can't trust will be exactly as it is, 6 months from now. And so WordPress, I've said this forever, is historically backward compatible to a fault. In other words, because it has to be, right? It powers 43% of the internet. They can't make changes that just affect sites. And so what happens is you have the people who are developing WordPress on the front line, advocates of WordPress like myself, and those who work for Automatic and some of the other companies. We're on the front line. We know the power of it. We know the capabilities. We know it's changing. And so part of our job is to facilitate in any way we can, whether it's training, education, videos, calls, one-on-one, group calls, masterminds, whatever. We're trying to help people, mainly designers, developers, freelancers, and agencies, understand how it works so they can slowly start to incorporate this into their workflow, because this is the future of WordPress. It's not going to be different. And so you have this sort of lag, maybe 6 months to 2-year lag between where WordPress actually is today versus where the developers, they're still building with classic themes and ACF, and understandably so, because it works. It's their system. It works. They don't have a need necessarily to adopt the new WordPress. And so you get new users and new freelancers who are, new to WordPress. They start with what's new now. So they don't have that history, this is how it's always been done. So they don't understand what that world looks like. So, but because there's so many people who've built over the years with WordPress, there's a huge subset of folks, 80% are still building kind of the old fashioned way.
So let me ask you, because, back in our history together, when I understood classic WordPress, it had essentially a MySQL database. It had a PHP front end. You were creating up designs, generally using the Genesis framework, of course, and putting child themes on there. But you were really bolting things together at some level of code. And now that is radically different, that the bolt-on of design using code, styling CSS, getting kind of deep into the guts sometimes, and is now very, very different and will be even further different. And I think this is interesting to me only because you have both the technical acumen of the back end side and the front end side. But to be fair, your strength was always in the front end. You're a great designer. You understand front end design and usability and how that bolts on. So where do you think the biggest impact is for WordPress developers or WordPress engagers? Is it on the design? Is that really where the challenges are? Or is it on the backside? Or is it equal between both?
So the backside becomes easier because it effectively has become more, and sometimes depending on how you use this new version of WordPress, truly no code. A developer could go in and not have the need to write PHP anymore the way that they used to. Like back in the day with Genesis, like that was significantly PHP and all that sort of stuff. And, themes now are more HTML files and, this theme JSON technology, which is sort of a different language, but basically integrates the styling from what we would see normally as like a style sheet into and connects it to the UI in the back of WordPress, which makes it a lot easier to, when we say the back end, we're talking about the site editor and the global style section. You can change colors without touching a line of code. You can add fonts without touching a line of code. You can change templates. You can add templates. You can do anything you want to without touching a line of code. And so that doesn't necessarily mean, the developers are no longer needed in the freelance space. It just means maybe what they've done or how they've built might be different. And so what we see now is, and I encourage everybody to do this, understand what is a block theme, how is a block theme comprised, build your own block theme, and then use that as your, we'll call it Genesis, right? Your own framework per se. And that's a different part of the conversation we won't get too deep into, but one of the reasons why we as partners decided to sell StudioPress is that we were unsure of the future of WordPress. And basically WordPress has cannibalized the value that Genesis itself brought, which is hooks and filters and the ability to move things around by way of the new block system and patterns and things like that. You can now easily do that and build a homepage, and there's no widgets anymore. Like, a lot has changed. And so it's a different landscape. I think the design element for designers, people can go in and design and build a site for a client without having to hire a developer, though they may need one to maybe build them a theme to start with. It's just, everything's different, but there's, it's a wide open sea, and there's going to be a need for all of it. And then, of course, you've got, custom blocks, because WordPress has its own block library, and it doesn't cover everything. And so you have developers who are PHP and JavaScript and React based, who, could carve out their own niche or sort of set of work building custom blocks for people. So, like, there's just a lot of opportunity still, and it's still growing. And
that's kind of what this is when you were talking about all this, as someone who looks at any market, I love when there's kind of chaos in a market, like market in transition, a market that is changing, because that does mean there are new opportunities, right? Yeah. People who have old sites worrying about what they have to do for the new people that are coming in and taking advantage of this opportunity. For new people that are like, we have this old system, we need a brand new system. So I love this. I mean, as someone who's in business, I love the fact that there's a state of change occurring, and especially because if you are one of those people that want to be on the forefront and you're competing against people that just know, I like classic WordPress, I want to be able to do this, well, their world is quickly going to evaporate, and they're going to either have to adapt or die. And if you're in the forefront, hey, that's great. So I think this is a great opportunity. I really do. I think if you're in WordPress right now, there are opportunities out there. And let's talk about them. So, because it's funny to me, and the vernacular you use. So to me, I think there's now a difference between a WordPress developer, a actual coding person who's maybe getting into the back end of the system, who is doing maybe some database optimization, who's taking some of the plugins that are out there, adapting, modifying them, et cetera, versus a WordPress designer, which does not necessarily mean, from what you said, it seems that they actually have to have the technical acumen that previous WordPress developers, because we used to call WordPress developers someone building a theme, right? Now you can build a theme and, as you pointed out, not touch a line of code. So talk to us a little bit about, that bifurcation and where those potential opportunities are for both the designer and the actual developer, especially when we start talking about plugins and system architecture.
Yeah, so back in the day, we had on our website a page called the Genesis Developers page. And we use that term loosely because we really kind of meant anybody who's building websites with Genesis. And so, as you said, the developer is usually associated with the ability to write code, program or PHP, JavaScript, React, all that kind of stuff. And I feel like over the last several years, and at WP Engine, we use this word all the time. It's more like website builder, right? Because builder means you could build it however you want. And the reality is, with Genesis, or even all of the page builders that exist inside of WordPress, like GeneratePress and Elementor and Beaver Builder, all of them, a lot of people who were actually calling themselves developers loosely, or builders or whatever, were basically just taking a theme and going in and using sort of the tools at hand to design and move things around. And, we kind of joke, at Genesis, it was like they were actually implementing the theme. So we actually called them implementers, sort of behind the scenes. They're just implementing a theme that was already built. And so, there's that. And so you'll see now with block-based WordPress, you can actually pull a theme down from the WordPress.org repository, and you could build out a Nassau-inspired site without touching a line of code and doing it purely as a designer, and there's still some work to be done, but you can go into the back end and you can set up the entire theme from colors to fonts to spacing to whatever you want for a customer without even touching a line of PHP code. Now, there might be parts of the job that you need to, that's kind of at like a simple scale. But there's always going to be a need still for that heavy developer, right? Because there's just going to always be a need for deeper stuff.
I want to key on this point, because this is really fascinating to me, because again, I'm trying to be opportunistic. I want freelancers to get more work. It used to be that you would hire a designer who would go into Photoshop, or nowadays Figma, and they create up the website design. And then they would hand those design files off to the developer who would then implement that design inside of code or some method. Now, if you're a designer, though, and I think this is one opportunity, is that not only can you design it, you can also implement, to use your word, that design. So now there's an additional opportunity, additional value add that you can say, I'm not just a website designer, or, I can actually go put this together for you, because the skill set that I used to need is no longer required, depending on the type of blocks that I'm interacting with, depending on how that design is. I think actually that's a better opportunity, because if I have the choice between two designers, I'd like to one that is not only going to design it, but they have to implement it, because you and I both know there's a difference between some pretty image on a file and how it renders actually in a website, especially with mobile responsive. So I think that's a huge opportunity right there. Just if you're in the design side and not as comfortable with the technical coding side that used to be a requirement. I want to take the second half, because one of the things that I know that people often struggled with, certainly we did, is plugins, right? I mean, I built a plugin for WordPress, for SEO. I mean, we knew, and we had to host these plugins. Plugins were kind of the bane of existence way back in the day, because you would install something and you'd light up 50 of them and 2 would work right and the others wouldn't check. I mean, it was just a nightmare. So what is the other half of this equation? The other things that just going to maintaining a high performing WordPress site, given the changes underfoot?
So forward thinking and even current, we'll call them website builders, I really advocate for anybody who's like me, sort of capable of doing both. Call yourself a website builder. Why? Because if you say you're a designer, then most of the people out in the market who are looking to hire, I'm not going to find a developer, as you said earlier, because now I've got a designer. But if I've got a guy that builds who can design and develop, that's a one-stop shop. And that's what I want to work with.
Okay, so that's the good thing to know. Call yourself a WordPress builder. You can build a WordPress site.
I build
For
WordPress
design,
websites or whatever.
I build.
Yes. And if there's a need to have a specific design asset done or whatever, or a developer, then I'm going to go find someone who does that, or maybe they work under my little agency or whatever, but we build WordPress websites. That would be like my first sort of recommendation for anybody who's kind of in the space and capable of doing both. The other one is, and I have done this actually several times, and the caveat is, and there's always a disclaimer at the bottom of ChatGPT that says sometimes we make mistakes. ChatGPT can become that little contractor of a smaller-ish like plugin functionality, right? If I build websites and that's how I market myself, maybe I'm mainly a designer and I have a client that says, I've got a couple of needs that this has to do that. ChatGPT or, Copilots or any of those sort of things are actually really good at building and writing code for plugins. Now they have to be tested and all of that, but I have successfully built many plugins using ChatGPT and just intelligent prompting. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that means all PHP programmers are going to lose their jobs to the Autobots or whatever, because there's always the opportunity. And maybe that really encourages those who are true programmers to get and like lean into the acquisition of design knowledge a little more. Say, I got this knowledge. I want to be no longer a developer. I want to be, as Brian says, a builder. In order to do that, I need to kind of beef up my design chops a little bit. And so the beauty with WordPress is there's almost not even a need to use Figma anymore either, even though that's kind of traditionally how we've done it, because you can go into and design in the same way. It's a little bit less sophisticated as Figma, the WordPress site editor, and just build it right there using the same relative, color pickers and, controls and whatnot. So again, there's many ways to WordPress. It just many flavors, many ways to do it. So,
yeah. So, I mean, and this is interesting that you've experimented with actually using some of these AI systems to go ahead and write small chunks of code, because, and Jason Cohen pointed out that, they stick with a very popular language, because that's what these models have been trained on. And so the more popular the programming language, the more information it has to help you as you're writing small code snippets. And I've certainly seen the case. I mean, I've written a couple of little small things for Pouncer, actually. Now, I write it and then I give it to Daniel, and Daniel looks at it and goes, That's a good first step, junior developer AI, Sean. So, but I do think that on the back end side, though, I don't think that people, I think you're just going to have to be more specialized too, because there is an inherent thing related to the database structure, right?
Yeah.
There is the inherent things related to security, and of course, WP Engine is known for performance and security. I mean, it started that way. We know the value of it. But are there other opportunities out there for builders? Because I'm going to say that in looking at the ecosystem of freelancers that we interact with, there's some pretty much hardcore just coders. I code. Give me in an IDE. I want to start hitting, away. Talk a little bit of what you're seeing there. I mean, plugins, is that still a viable market, both in creating them and in maintaining them on high production sites? Security, database architecture, are these still things that, have value, even though WordPress is moving as a very steady clip?
Yeah, so there's obviously several levels of sort of development. And so we'll go on the high end, the very sophisticated stuff that you would just mention, things like security and performance and stuff like that. There's always going to be a need for that. How you get that type of work probably is more around, and that work is so specialized, it's almost easier to get a job full-time doing that work than trying to get outsourced to do that work. Because that's one of those things where, like, I got to make sure that the person I'm hiring knows exactly what they're doing. So it's a little bit...
So more of a long-term contract. I mean,
yeah, higher risk
site performance
sort of
in general. Site performance is not a weekend, side gig. Site performance is something that you're going to have to be living with, setting up benchmarks, tweaking, implementing, reviewing, and tweaking again, et cetera. So, but many freelancers will get a 3-month, 6-month gig potentially.
Yes. And I know that Upwork handles primarily freelance work. That is, in general, WordPress and just web development anywhere is more a race to the bottom than it ever has been, because there's so many people who know how to do it, and it's become easier to do. There's a lot more tools to do it, WordPress and otherwise. And I would say for anybody to complement their freelance career, if that's where they stay, the product space is probably where the biggest opportunity for anybody is. You know that you're building a product right now. We've built products before. And so somebody who's really good at writing PHP code and things that are like, basic WordPress stuff, building, a plugin where there is a need, something like Gravity Forms, circa 2000, whatever. That is where I think, niching out and building products for very specific use cases is where people who have, extra time or want to sort of supplement their income. I mean, the 4-hour work week, we all want recurring revenue, and, education and products are probably the two biggest things. So if you know how modern WordPress works and, you're really, really good at it and you've got a little bit of downtime, maybe your slate's not super full, build a course, train other people. There's generally enough work to be, spread around, but product space, I think, is where, at least within WordPress, where we'll see most of the money made.
What about, the other aspect of that, in which obviously I agree, productizing your service, I mean, you see this a lot, especially on Fiverr, now that Fiverr is more than $5, people are productizing, I do this one type of implementation. And so to extend on that, what about becoming a specialist in the WordPress ecosystem around certain type of products that already exist out there? I know Elementor is very popular right now, but of course that's on the design side. There are other SEO tools. I know most of the big platforms like HubSpot have ways to integrate into WordPress. And so what about this idea of productizing your service? Like, I am an expert in this particular SEO tool or this particular lead capture. I am an expert in ConvertKit. And so if you have a WordPress site and you need X, I can take your email program. Let's make it a bigger ConvertKit, MailChimp, whatever you're using. I know how to implement it so that it works properly and secure. I mean, do you think there are opportunities around that for freelancers?
Yes, although there's a catch here. And, we at Copyblogger spoke very much about digital sharecropping and the dangers of that. And so when you build for another third-party piece, whether it's Elementor or Gravity Forms or anything else, if you call yourself and we sort of enabled people to do that with Genesis, right? People built their careers on Genesis, but it was built on Genesis and not necessarily just WordPress. And so if something happened to Genesis, they were at risk. And so your question about like sort of like the HubSpot sort of things, call yourself a marketing specialist and then choose your tool. That way, if for some reason a tool gets acquired and then sunset, you're not out to dry, right? Like then you just shift your tool. And so I am an expert in building WordPress websites and integrating marketing tools, so that way you could focus on people who need, WordPress websites in the marketing space, and then have a page where these are the tools of choice. I use HubSpot. I integrate with ConvertKit. I integrate with, some of these other things. And so you can kind of use that, but I wouldn't lead with those things specifically.
Got it. All right. Now to kind of come to full circle, when we were talking to Jason Cohen at the very end of our conversation, he was going on and on about headless WordPress. Okay. I think he is personally vested in the success of headless WordPress. And I will tell you, as a fellow technologist, I understand the value of it. We build in React. We understand that headless, there's a lot of performance improvements, but I also know there's a lot of trade-offs to your typical CRUD style database, CMS style system, loading PHP up with a whole bunch of caches in front of it. This ain't it. So talk a little bit, as an advocate for WordPress, my friend, talk to us a little bit about headless. Is there really an opportunity there for developers? Because it sounds like such a specialized skill.
Yes. In full disclosure, I know very little about the technical aspects of headless WordPress. I know that we have, we offer that here at WP Engine.
Atlas, right?
Yeah. I think, Atlas. And I know Jason's a brilliant mind and on another level than I am. And so that being said, I know that there's a need for it, and it's very specific need. And in the cases in which headless makes the most sense, it is by far the best choice, and for several reasons. I think the thing we don't want to tell people is everybody needs a headless site, or if you've got like a little blog, you don't need headless, because it makes no sense. It's too expensive. The trade-offs aren't worth it, whatever. So major sites that need more than just WordPress out of the box, absolutely there's a space. Absolutely there should be people offering that, and absolutely people should be using it. I don't live in that world, though. I'm adjacent to it just with the work I do. In my world, 98% of the use cases of WordPress, I sort of live down in the plankton of the space, right? Where, the remedial use of WordPress, which, most people just need a marketing website, this is who we are, like a brochure site sort of a thing. And they usually just hire someone to just build, hey, I need 5 pages, a blog, that kind of a thing. Yeah. And so that's the space I live in. And what I will say is this: my recommendation to anybody who's a freelance designer, developer, or builder, if you get to that point, is to learn how modern WordPress works. Pull a block theme down from the repository and understand how it works, and this is why I get so excited. This is why I came back to WP Engine full time. This is why I built block themes. I've got several out there, because the system in which it is now based on makes it so easy, especially with patterns now. Go research what block patterns are in WordPress. You can build websites top to bottom so quickly if you, as a freelancer, have your own library of patterns sort of sitting around, where you can effectively build a client a $5,000 website in like 3 hours. It really, and no joke, I'm not stretching the truth here. And that's the power of where WordPress is going. Just so many people just aren't there yet. I see it. I almost wish I was a freelancer just so I could take advantage of it, but I love my job and don't want to quit. So there's that too.
Yeah. Well, this has been absolutely a fascinating discussion, Brian. I thank you so much for sharing your on-the-ground insights on the opportunities available to freelancers and on the future direction of WordPress that they can take advantage of. Really appreciate you being here, man.
Yep. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.
Thank you for watching the video. And if you're not already subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel here. More importantly, if you found it useful, please share it with your friends. And one more thing, if you're looking for some great tools to help you succeed on Upwork, go check out Pouncer.ai. We think you'll like it.